So it's a great pleasure. Thank Caroline, John and Kathy for inviting me to kick off. I've been asked to give a 20,000-foot view of health data science, but also talk a little bit about Health Data Research UK, our National Institute for Health Data Science. And I'll canter through this, because 50 minutes is too long, so we'll see how we go. So what I want to do is talk about how do we gear an entire country up, the UK, for quality healthcare research and innovation. And I do think we need to see a convergence of care and research, and I'll be talking about that. Secondly, data science is the catalyst for change. I think we're at an inflection point where we're moving away from electronic health records towards data-driven innovation. So we'll talk about that. So definitions are important. So my definition of data science is the interface between math, statistics, computational science, and domain. And our domain is health, life sciences, biomedical research. So how many mathematicians in the room? Well, that's really good, actually. Oh, a latecomer. And as statisticians? That's really good. Computational scientists? That's really good. And the rest, domain sort of expertise. Yeah. So you are health data scientists, because usually when we come to meetings like this, it's all skewed to one direction. And my argument is we need to promote interdisciplinarity if we're going to get this right. And lastly, I'm going to talk about trust. This is all about patients. It's not about research, it's about patients and delivering benefit to patients and populations. So how do we become trusted as we do so? Before that, we're very proud of the NHS. As you know, it was 70 years old last year, and there was Nye Bevan. He launched it in Trafford General Hospital. Some people suggest this is Mrs. Thatcher in the bed. Listening very intently, quite the most ambitious adventure in the care of national health that any country has ever seen. And as you know, it's outlasted 14 prime ministers, soon to be 15. And we're very proud of the NHS. And can we converge care and research to actually maximize the data engine that's the NHS? That was 1948. Now, in the same year, something very special was happening in this place. Callum, do you know where that is? There's a clue. Pardon?
It's in the US.
Oh, well done. So this is Framingham Town Hall, which is only about 40 miles due west of you, is that right? So in 1948, 5,000 town residents got together. We all know Framingham, it's iconic. About 2,000 contributions to the literature, slightly less than John Dinesh, I should say. But what did Framingham do? It was one of the first times that scientists got together with healthcare professionals and citizens to drive science. Citizens to drive science. It coined the phrase risk factor, blood pressure, smoking, cholesterol, diabetes, the intimate links to heart attacks and stroke. And Claude Lafont, he was a predecessor of Francis Collins, suggested that Framingham has resulted in an average of 4 extra years of life, which is quite a claim. But actually, if there are any GPs in the audience, if we calculate primary cardiovascular risk of people coming into our surgery today in the UK, some of the quadratic equations are derived from those original 5,000 people, so it's quite a thought. And if you log on to the Framingham Civic website, they, with classical American modesty, suggest we are the town that changed America's heart. But this is important, because if you look at features of high-performing health systems internationally, so this is some work from Baker et al. He suggests that, yes, we focus on quality, leadership, and governance, but really high-performing health systems have 2 other things. They have whole system intelligence, so they track in real time primary, secondary, tertiary social care journeys of care, and they invest in data science and innovation at the heart of their health systems. So how do we bring these skills we talked about into our health systems? And that has been our thesis in the UK. How can we drive excellence in life sciences through translation, trials, and innovation to world-class patient care? And can we use data-driven innovation or data science as the catalyst for change? So that's the sort of thesis. And as you know, I grew up in Scotland, so this is the classic rail bridge over the River Forth. So I'm just going to use Scotland as a bit of a case study for the next few minutes, but also make the case that I think that 5 million populations are tractable, because you can get folk in a room, and it's a small room, and try and drive change. So in terms of characteristics of Scotland, this is the official map of Scotland now. I hope you like it. We spent about £13 billion on healthcare for a population of 5 million. Yes, we're fragmented. You know, we've got 38 hospitals, we've got 1,000 general practices, but we've really tried to drive collaboration at scale across the major centres. And if you look at health systems internationally, in terms of their EHR capability, they're very good at measuring process. So we can count doctors, we can count nurses, we can count beds, we can count GP contacts, admissions. But if we're really going to resonate, we've got to migrate from measurement of activity to real-time measurement of processes and outcomes meaningful for patients, and that's phenotyping. So how do we phenotype in real time to drive change? To do that, one needs to do it across journeys of care, and we've been fortunate, and we can do this in the UK now, that we've adopted common indexes. This is my Community Health Index. So wherever I go in Scotland, as illustrated here, my data follows me. So if I interface with general practice, allied health professionals, hospitals, then journeys of care can be followed. So a few examples of that. For the last, I think, 13 years, this was Libby who led it, we have an emergency care summary. So if I'm admitted to any hospital in Scotland, the admitting physician can look at my record. We access it about 3.5 million times a year, and it changes management 20% of the cases. So journeys of care. For unstructured data, imaging, for the last, I think it's about 12 years, Emily, is it, roughly? Yeah, about 12 years. We've had a common PACS for the nation. So this means that regardless of those hospitals, we have a single information system. It reduced re-examination initially. That was a big win in cost. Because, you know, classically, if you end up in a hospital down the road, what do? They repeat the examination. So someone once said to me, he said, "Maurice, what's the most expensive piece of medical technology?" I said, "I don't know." And they said, "The doctor's pen." And the reason is that we duplicate. So a single systematic approach to radiology, and now what Emily is leading is curating that national database of 31 million studies for care and research. So how do we do that at scale? My own world was diabetes, just to credit Alistair and Scott, but again, it's the same approach. Linkage of journeys of care, of both structured and unstructured data, but then through the work of Colin Palmer and others, we added DNA, so it's shown schematically here. So it's great for patient care, and in the early days, within 5 years, we showed, you know, remarkable improvements in process measures, whether it's biochemistry, retinal screening. And in the early years, Helen Cahoon and many others actually demonstrated that, you know, we improved patient outcomes, whether it's amputation by about 40% reduction, and actually life expectancy. These are Helen Cahoon's data showing that life expectancy improved through systematic surveillance of patient populations based on phenotype. And that's important. However, collect data once and use it often. So what many of us did was try to say, can we scale this for 5 million citizens, incorporating multimodal data from birth to death, but also through the work of Chris Dibben and others, looking at integrating social and environmental data through linkage, whether it's air pollution, whether it's educational attainment, even whether it's working in partnership with the police to look at road traffic accidents and therapeutic effects on road traffic accidents. And this is what many folk call a learning health system: collect data once and use it often. And if you do that, it has multiple benefits. And I think that will be a theme of this conference. So one or two just very quick examples. Here's Jill Pell from Glasgow. There's some things you can't really randomize in society. George Davis Smith gave us a great talk yesterday on observation versus randomization. But here's Jill Pell, because politicians don't often randomize policy. But what you can do is do non-experimental evaluation of policy. So what Jill did was look at the smoking ban, and pre- and post-ban, using England as a comparator. She looked at admissions for acute coronary syndrome. This is in the New England Journal. Admissions fell by 17%. 67% of the reduction was in non-smokers, showing the disbenefit of passive smoking. And likewise, in the New England Journal, childhood admissions for acute asthma, as you know, atopy is going up in the population, but then it fell 18% after the ban. So great evidence of using routine data to demonstrate impact of policy. And I was actually in India about 3 years after these data were published, and they'd impacted the largest smoking ban on the planet, 1.2 billion people. And the politicians said, well, actually, we used Scottish data to convince us it was worth doing. So there's an example. Here's Dave Newby. Here's another example. When we have clinical equipoise, can we randomize within the health system? So a investigation we were uncertain of was computed tomography, coronary angiography. So what Dave said is the use of this new investigative procedure, which is quite expensive, is it better than the usual treatment? If I collapsed with chest pain here, I'd be admitted to Addenbrooke's, I hope. And they would do an ECG, enzymes, maybe put me on a treadmill. Should we use this investigation at source? So he randomized within the population. First thing to note is the numbers. Almost 50% of all eligible people randomized over 12 hospitals because of the integrated system through the imaging network. But key was that follow-up was through record linkage, through automated capture of data. And published in the Lancet and New England Journal, what Dave showed was, firstly, it was effective, CT coronary angiography. So it changed the diagnosis 1 in 4, changed management in 1 in 4. But key to this was the cost. So we funded this when I was the chief scientist in Scotland. And as you know, the Scots are very frugal. And it cost us £600,000 for a study of 5,000 people. A similar American study, I think Callum will know, was about $47 million. So if we get the data infrastructure right, you can randomize within the population. And of course, it's not restricted to phenotypic or codified data. Through several studies, David Porteous is here today. I think you're still wearing that shirt, David, actually. Not the tie. And Colin Palmer have linked studies such as Generation Scotland, the genetics of darts, and now this initiative, which is a very interesting initiative, GoShare, where everyone in the population is being invited to do two things. Can you consent for DNA and other biological materials to be collected, and can you consent to use of my medical records? I think there's about 200,000 people consented, 300,000 people consented to GoShare. Then we have these longitudinal records of data. So one early example of using EHR data to derive new biology was some work from Ewan Pearson and Kai-Sun Zhao. I think this was one of the first population studies of pharmacogenetics with Sir Peter Donnelly, I should say. Clearly this study won it over. He was knighted by the Queen at the weekend, for those who don't know. And we're able to describe new biology from routine data. As you know, Metformin, most commonly prescribed drug for diabetes. There are now, partly because of these data, about 260 trials internationally looking at the effect of Metformin on cancer progression, because ATM and upstream LKB1 is a major factor in cell cycle regulation. So discovering new data from existing drugs, and also looking at the safety of existing drugs. In the UK, we dispense 1.2 billion items a year. We have the potential to capture those data in a patient-specific way, and we should have real-time surveillance of safety, effectiveness, and value. And actually, here's Aziz Sheikh using such a system to look at the safety of varenicline, the most effective smoking cessation therapy. So that's where we are at the moment, but I'm going to try and convince you we're at an inflection point where it's a new age. And we're on the cusp of science that has endless possibilities. So does anyone know do you know where that is?
It's Davos of Switzerland.
Oh, well, you sound knowledgeable. Are you from there?
Not Davos, but Switzerland a long time ago.
All right, well done, yes. I've never been invited, I must say. But, so, and if you, even Theresa May yesterday, by the way, you don't need to photograph slides because you can have them all. They're all going to be given to you. I don't mind folk using my slides, so you can have them all. Even Theresa May yesterday, she was at Tech City launching a £1.2 billion investment into tech. And she's talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And it's affecting every industry in every nation. The pace of change is exponential rather than linear. But my goodness, is it disruptive. And you know, it has huge benefits, but it's also arguably responsible for the death of the high street. It's also undermining the fabric of democracy in many ways. So I guess my argument is this is coming in medicine and healthcare, and our challenge is to ensure that we embrace it in a trustworthy way, because it could go horribly wrong. It could go horribly wrong. So what about the fourth industrial revolution? This is a slide from Ara Darzi in WISH, big international conference. And what he did was plot the sectors, because we've always got to look outside science and medicine for clues of how to do things well. For the rate of adoption and the amount of money going into data science and AI, and as you'd anticipate, fintech and technology companies are at the forefront of this. Where are we in health? We're sort of mid-table. We're like a West Ham of adoption. But I think this is beginning to change very rapidly. But again, looking out of our sectors, why is this important? So we had a great computational science representation at our meeting yesterday. And my learning from the computational scientists is that what we've seen in recent years is remarkable progress, not only in a linear fashion of what I call the computational subspecialties, whether it's sensors, robotics, natural language, but also we're seeing a major confluence of those technologies. So this notion, because autonomous vehicles, for example, as a new technology, use several of these. It's not a singular. So our challenge in medicine will be to look at the confluential opportunities of these new technologies. So that's a reason why things are changing. Another reason is because, as you know, medicine's becoming increasingly data intensive. Here's our old mate, Leroy Hood, who talks about 4P medicine, which is predictive, preemptive, personalized, and participatory, enabled by genomics, phenotyping, informatics, analytics, and a new social contract. Again, trust shining through. And this is, you know, a lot of this meeting will be about prescriptive analytics and prediction. And we need these tools of 4P medicine. A third reason is scale. And these are some of Kathy's data, chief scientist of Biobank. So this is the relationship between mortality and blood pressure of Framingham, 5,000 people. That's 50,000 people, and that's 500,000 people. That's UK Biobank. And I think scale is going to become increasingly important. And a sort of thought experiment to try and illustrate that is in cancer. You know, this very campus, Mike Stratton and colleagues, I think, described, was it 130 mutations in breast cancer? But if you do the thought experiment in terms of precision medicine, precision trials, one can ask the question, how many millions of people in your denominator population do you need to achieve 250 incident sick patients per annum with a specific cancer with a specific biomarker, bearing in mind that most of the frequencies are down here. So for common cancers, whether it's lung, it's about 47 million. For pancreatic cancer, 225. For precision liver, it's very large numbers. And that's why we are very enthusiastic participants in stuff like the Global Alliance, because this is a global endeavor if we're going to understand the intricate nature of disease. Another reason why it's important for the UK is our economic profile. We're very fortunate. We're trying to get up to, 2.4% of GDP spend on R&D, which would take us up to the OECD average. But there has to be a return on the investment of those public funds. What this slide shows is the productivity of the UK since the financial crash, 2008. And basically, we've fallen off a cliff. The French are 18 percentage points ahead of us, the Germans 36%. And one good way to increase productivity is to innovate and automate. But can we use health data science as a stimulus for a new market? Because that's what's happening in Boston, and we're not doing it as well in the UK. And one of the reasons for that is access to data. So this is some data from the Medicines Discovery Catapult. It's very simple. They went to 100 SMEs and said, firstly, is access to biosamples and data important for your UK business? About 80% said, yes, it's pretty important. How easy is it to do business with us in the UK? And about 70-80% said it's actually not easy at all. So what happens? In the black box, they go abroad, which is crazy. If we can develop our assets in a trustworthy way with public support, we should be driving the use of them to define, medicines discovery and the application of these new technologies. So let's think about what can be done. So just if you'll be familiar with these, I'm sure. I think this is one of the first examples in nature of using deep convolutional neural networks applied to unstructured data. So this is Sebastian Thrun. He was the head of R&D at Google, now applying himself to life sciences. And he basically managed on 130,000 skin images, pretty large scale, to differentiate malignant melanoma from benign seborrheic keratosis. So is this lesion malignant or not? And he did it pretty well, better than certified grade dermatologists. So this is John, and that's Adam Butterworth there, isn't it? Yeah. So John, I think, is doing remarkable work looking at routine data from our blood donors in the UK. So this is some work from 3,300 blood donors published in Nature next year, looking at proteomic expression linked to genetic expression. He tells me John personally performed 36 billion statistical tests, but what he was able to do was to define new biology by applying new technology to routine data at scale. And it's a great example of harnessing the assets of the NHS. Third example in Cell, again on the imaging piece, application of AI to pediatric pneumonia. Is it viral? Is it bacterial? And also OCT scans. Again, pretty big numbers required, but one can train machine learning to actually effectively classify images. Even if we could throw out the normals, it would be a huge advantage. Because Nicholas Strickland, who's the president of the Royal College, tells me that today in the UK there are 250,000 people waiting for the result of a medical diagnostic imaging examination. So there's a lot of delay in the system, and about 40% are normal. And just to illustrate that, it goes across the screening system. So if we can use automation to actually drive efficiency and productivity, it's a good thing. And a final example is in high-performance computing. Every year there's a prize called the Gordon Bell Prize. He sounds Scottish. Awarded last in November of last year. It's not really the subject matter, it's the scale of the compute. So they awarded the Gordon Bell Prize, I think it was to the university, the VA and Tennessee, through an analysis of GWAS study with 1 billion records, but it's because they're computing now at the exascale. 2.4 billion comparisons per second. So this is the scale of compute that's coming our way. It took 3 hours. Traditional UK compute would have taken 4 months to complete. So computational science is coming at scale. And we were discussing this at breakfast. What we're seeing is the emergence of FDA approvals of CE marks for some of these AI products. So this is the list. You don't need to, it's a bit of a busy slide. There were 14 approvals for AI products in January of this year by the FDA. There are now 26 within 3 months. So we're going to see more and more of these tools coming through to fruition. So, how are we going to do this? Because this is a complex landscape. And so I'm a doctor, so I'm now going to give you a clinical lens of what I think the challenges are. And the question for me is, how do we learn from the biologic community? Because I think you've sorted a lot of these things out for us. The first thing is data quality. And I think this is a huge, huge issue. And I'm going to illustrate that in a moment, but just to show that when you get your quality right, you create huge value. So this is Amy Abernethy, who now works for the FDA. She moved there from a place called Flatiron, which was a startup company about 10 years ago. Bought by Roche last year for $2.1 billion, so it's a double unicorn. 2.1 million patient records and 210 oncology practices. And basically what they're trying to do is to curate data from EHRs that approaches research quality. So longitudinal, multimodal data, research quality from EHRs. And everyone, when it was sold, everyone said, wow, that must be the best artificial intelligence algorithm ever to create such value. But actually, it was a mechanical Turk. Does anyone know what a mechanical Turk was? Well, it's sort of. So it was actually, and this is true, in the 18th century, there's this big wooden box which played chess, okay? And it had a big velvet cover over it. And it beat Napoleon, it beat Benjamin Franklin. And everyone thought it was a machine, a computer, but there was actually a man inside pulling the levers. So Flatiron, because we spoke to them, they have a battalion of 1,000 data curators who go around and do it by hand. So, but it shows you that if we can improve the phenotype, it will have immense value. And actually, George yesterday presented data that Pfizer have used this data set to actually get a registration for a drug for males with breast cancer from memory. So it has huge value. So data quality is a big issue, And just to illustrate how big an issue it is in the UK, here's Ewan. We did Metformin. He sent me a slide saying, Andrew, this is the top 20 ways we prescribe Metformin in the UK. And I said, that's very interesting. And he said, these are the bottom 20 ways. So some of it is, take 1 Twix a daily. So this is the way we prescribe. For Metformin alone, there were 5,700 ways. And this is not atypical. It's because of lack of standardization, lack of automation. So how can we have precision medicine when we don't have precision prescribing? And just to show you the Flatiron example, this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but in the early days when we curated the data of 300,000 people with diabetes in Scotland, we did that. We had a Flatiron team who went out. They went out to check the data. And actually, Richie, who's still doing it, I think, he phoned me one day, says, Andrew, we've had a few miracles. I said, what's that, Richie? He says, well, I found 10 patients walking around the streets of Edinburgh who, according to the NHS, are dead. And he said, what do we do? And being an academic, I said, oh, we need to publish that, Richie. So one can calculate the life after death range and the resurrection rate in Scotland. But this will be happening unless we really look at quality. The second big issue is digital maturity of health systems. So this meeting will be about clinical risk intervention, predictive and analytics, and personalized medicine. But how receptive is our health system to achieving this? And this is where American colleagues have stolen a march on us, because you have better digital maturity in your hospital environments. We have arguably better digital maturity in our primary care. And the old HIMSS scale, where are we in the UK? We're 2 to 4, basically, on that scale. So few places are 7 or 8, although I think Adam Brooks is, because of the investment, is getting there. So this is going to be a big issue for us. I'm delighted that Matthew Gould and others are looking at scale across the UK. So data quality, digital maturity. The third thing, it's a complex environment, and I think, chatting to Callum on the way in, how can we drive interoperability to work across systems with no additional effort? Because currently we have not spent the time, the energy that we need to look at driving standardizations. So that's a picture of the UK, just a few of the parties, the partners in the UK have an interest in this area. And that's going to be a challenge. But when I looked at Holland, because I was there recently, they look just the same. And I'm sure the US is just the same. But to drive interoperability is where the prize is, because it will make everyone's life easier. So to do this, you need team science at scale. And I was thinking, what's a great picture of team science? So this is not team science, because we do need to look at how we partner. No, it's not to say we're going to be very Soviet and eliminate competition, but a lot of this is pre-competitive. And how do we drive that? Fourth big issue is this is a tidal wave of data. So I was just reflecting about pace of change. I graduated in 1987, and this is a picture of state-of-the-art computer technology in 1987. And that was it. That was launched. And that was quite a big one, because that was 1.4 megabytes. So just to illustrate the pace of change, as you know, we've been through gigas, teras, petas, exas. Anyone know what comes after exas? Yeah, well done, it's zettabytes. So the World Wide Web holds about 5 zettabytes of data. And other industries are doing this. There's Peter Giggs at CERN that curates 30 petabytes of data a year. This will be the Square Kilometre Array, which will be the largest telescope on the planet. I think it's off Chile and South Africa. And that will curate 10 petabytes of data per hour. And what we're seeing is the move to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, rather than us all having our own computer under our desks. And sadly, I think, especially in my world of clinicians, scientists, everyone wants their data under their desk. Actually, those days are gone. And we're seeing that in the market. IBM and Red Hat, this was a £34 billion merger, because it's about hybrid cloud provision, sovereign cloud, hybrid cloud. And this is part of our world. And then the fifth issue is trust. And we spend a lot. We had a great day yesterday. We had our public advisory board here, because we really have to do this in partnership with the publics. And actually, this was a headline from The Guardian just yesterday. NHS data is worth billions, but who should have access to it? So this is a very vexed, very political issue in the UK. And if we get it wrong, it could set us back 10, 15 years. And I personally think that we've got to look at how we use data for the common good and learn lessons from the Human Genome Project. And we have a privileged responsibility to be data stewards. So how do we do that in a virtuous way? And we don't have all the answers, but we're baking it into everything that we do. We need to treat participants' data like gold, and the people who very generously give it like gold. So that's the sort of background to this. And if we get this right, this is Chuck Friedman, who you maybe know, and Victor Zhao, and I do sort of subscribe to this whole system intelligence must have a virtuous efferent loop, so that we feed value back to patients who donate the data, or health systems that donate the data. What we classically do as academics is this, we publish and then we move on. And I think that we have a responsibility to think, how do we harness the knowledge and actually co-create and demonstrate impact back in the system. And I'm delighted in the UK we're beginning to see learning systems such as this is a sort of fragmented London. But London has actually come together under the leadership of Luke, Carol and Cambers to create a One Health record for London with the thesis we're going to feed those data back to the point of care at scale. So in the last, I think I've got about 7 or 8 minutes, just talk about HDR UK, which is the National Institute for Health Data Science. And it's a bit different because it's not a bricks and mortar institute. What we're trying to do is to develop cutting-edge data science approaches to clinical, biological, genomic, and other complex health data so that we really benefit from this fourth industrial revolution in health data science. And our mission is to unite the UK's health data to make discoveries that improve people's lives. And in the future, we want to be able to run studies on up to 66 million people. That's the scale of ambition. And Roz is in the audience. This is one of her slides. So we have detail. So at this meeting, we'll be talking about high-dimensional multimodal data, and we have scale up to 65 million. So what we're trying to do is to really look at those thorny issues and to really unite the UK's health data in a very enabling way. And one could argue UK Biobank's down here, because it's multimodal, 500,000 people. Some of the data I'll show you on HES is up here, 65 million people. But how do we get that really granular phenotype? So our model is a bit different. First of all, can we credit the funders? Because 10 funders have come together. We've awarded us initially about £120 million. But they've said, instead of us all having fragmented funding schemes, can we come together to try to do something at scale? So we are a separate legal entity. We sit in the Wellcome Trust. Importantly, we never want to be a data controller, because that would just conflict us. We also want to remain lean in this building, but invest in substantive sites. So we create health data science ecosystems, which are outstanding, but are very interoperable. And we have a single set of terms for conditions and research collaborations with a major focus of interoperability standards and governance. So that's the model. It's a bit different. So our strategic aims are, I call it the triple aim: science, talent, and infrastructure. Let's drive science and innovation. Let's build the next generation. But most importantly, let's create that interoperable platform that allows us to perform science at scale, all sitting upon a foundation of public trust. And if we do that well, it will be very enabling for many scientists globally, right through from scientific discovery to evaluation of new treatments. So we've been going at this for our quinquennium, started last May. So in the first about 13 months, these are our current sites. So the Cambridge cluster, Oxford, London. So it was great to see Imperial King's London School, Queen Mary UCL come together. I usually say it's the first time since Churchill that they've worked together. Scotland under Cathy's leadership, the Midlands, Wales and Northern Ireland. We have a gap in the north and the southwest that we're looking at. We've got outstanding leaders and directors and associate directors. This is a picture of our directors. John's here today, Cathy's here today. I also think you need to think about how you get this interdisciplinary science going. And through previous investments, we do have places where folk can breathe the same air, so that ethicists, computational scientists, clinicians, etc., can actually come and co-create. And we've got some great environments across the UK where that's beginning to happen. So what we're trying to do is to create a single institute in a federated way. So these are some of the early images of that, and in the first year on the science, for example, we do have a single institute agreement for 22 universities. We think it's the first time it's been done. It wasn't easy, but it means we can now contract in a singular way across the landscape. We have 64 open access publications, and we have partnerships, for example. We're very excited about a partnership with the BHF to create a cardiovascular phenotype for the UK. So in terms of the science, we said we don't want to do stuff that single universities can do. We want to do projects that requires collaboration at scale. So where we've landed on are trials, applied health analytics, omics, which John's leading, 21st century public health. And just to illustrate that, it's been fantastic team building at scale across the nation. Emily's here today. Not only geographically, but from a sort of interdisciplinary way. And our first national projects are to create a national phenomics resource led by Spiros, a national text analytics project to look at NLP across distributed data sets, and an e-cohort of 20 million people led by Colin. And just to give you a little bit of the detail of this, so the challenge of clinical trials. As we know, the current model of phase 3 trials is arguably broken. So PCSK9, a lot of hype in this space, but trials on average can cost more than $1 billion for a phase 3 trial. And what we're beginning to see is companies, because that is high risk if you have a negative result. So companies are moving away from preventative and long-term treatments for common disease to a focus on very expensive drugs for rare conditions. So under the leadership of Martin, we're saying, can we use data to really drive the efficiency of the clinical trials process in terms of recruitment, follow-up, safety, study quality? Because if you look at the recruitment pathway, so this is a classical phase 3, there are multiple places you could use data to improve the efficiency and productivity. So one example of that is a study that needs 15,000 people, doing in partnership with NHS Digital, but we're using the national data set in England for 55 million people to look at eligibility. And then what Martin is doing is matching eligibility up by geospatial analysis with recruitment sites. And we're now sending out 10,000 letters a week to really drive efficiency of trials. So trials at scale. Phenomics, so here's Spiros I mentioned. This was in the Lancet Digital Health just last week, I think. So what he did is use 4 million patient records to look at incident disease, across the deciles of age. And what that allowed him to do was to create a chronological map of risk of 308 physical and mental health conditions from electronic health records. But what he's gone on to do is to make those data available in a phenomics portal. So it's an open resource for everyone to use. And this was a lovely tweet from a PhD student who said, just as I was questioning what possessed me to choose to use EH data for my PhD, stuff like this is giving me hope. An international open resource of phenotypes that we can all benefit from. And that's what we're investing in, learning from Emerge, PCORI, Global Alliance, etc. So doing this standard stuff well, doing it once, and making it open and available. The second priority is in training. Two things there, meeting capacity, but also looking at career tracks. And here's Peter, George, and Gabri helping us with this. working with partners such as NIHR, can we train 10,000 health data scientists within the next few years? So a big focus on training. And in our first year, many of our non-clinical fellows are here. We've landscaped 200 health data science courses across our partners, which we're going to promote. And we've got a PI cohort of about 120 people. So science training, and then on the infrastructure, this arguably is the most difficult bit. But what we want to do is create a robust UK health data research infrastructure. Government has asked us to do this. So this is phase one. Importantly, we've learnt from other industries. You know, I could give John Dinesh £100 within a minute because both his bank and my bank, although they're competitive, subscribe to SWIFT. So what we're trying to be is the SWIFT equivalent of healthcare data so that we have a neutral but national cooperative oversight of driving standardization across the patch. And to do that, our DIH program has 3 layers. It has, we have patients here who, as we've seen, interact with the system in its complexity. We're curating data into digital innovation hubs, and then we're creating a gateway infrastructure layer which allows researchers anywhere to look and discover data without any personal identifiable data being in this fabric layer. It's the way that other industries do it. So very briefly, the Alliance is about standards. So we've brought together our big data controllers, and we're working to agree on standards of governance, data access, standards, etc., with international oversight. So we've set up an international panel who are world leaders in data protection and governance, because that will be very important for us. And our initial focus is on how do we create safe environments with public engagement. So it's about safe projects being undertaken by safe people in safe data, safe places with safe outputs. And if our data controllers can subscribe to a common framework, it will drive interoperability. Secondly, the competition for the hubs is live. We're putting £22 million into it initially to create an initial 5 hubs which actually curate data well as part of that ecosystem and also become part of the Alliance. And then the third bit of it is the gateway, the fabric, and we'll have a minimal viable product for this in place by December of this year with oversight of multiple data sets. And actually we were seeing yesterday through the work of Phil Quinlan and colleagues in Bristol, Nick Timpson, we've got the ability to scan across Genomics England, Generation Scotland, and ALSPAC to look at comparative cohorts. And I'll speed up because of time. So basically, this is what we're building. So I'll skip on. Because this is complex. This is what I call the data stack. It's complex. And it can't just be built by academics. It needs to be done in partnership with industry. And because of that, we're partnering with British Heart Foundation, as I suggested, with NHS Digital, just to give them huge credit, and also the Alan Turing Institute. So that's where we are. In the final slide, I just want to say, what is next? The 4th industrial revolution. So this is beyond biomedical science. I'd point you towards the Future Today Institute report, just published 3 weeks ago. So this talks about trends across the sector. Key takeaways for this year. Firstly, quite emotive. Privacy is dead. Just by virtue of being alive in 2019, you are generating data, both intentionally and unwittingly, that is mined, refined, productized, and monetized. So there's a thought. Secondly, we talk about AI. We spend $300 billion a year on R&D in AI. 80% of it's in industry. They call them the 9 big tech companies. I love the acronym G Mafia, which is Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, IBM, and Amazon, and Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So we have to deal with these companies because that's where all the talent and all the investment is. So how do we do that? Thirdly, we ignore China at our peril, as you've seen in the press. Fourthly, VSO will be the new search engine. So that's how we all interact with devices. Fifthly, personal data records are coming, a single unifying ledger of our lives. That is coming. Sixthly, and I was a lawmaker once, we really struggle to deal with the change. Regulators are 5 years behind this space. And as I've suggested, consolidation changes in this space. So to summarize, I think this is a great conference. Thank you to the organizers. It's very timely because health data science will disrupt medicine. I think there are huge opportunities for us, but we'll need to do this in partnership, and we need to place trust at the heart of everything we do. But to finish, I just want to finish on sharing. So this was in Nature 4 days ago. You know, I don't think our community has spread itself in glory because we have too much proprietorial behavior around. It's my data. It's actually not our data. It's often the people who've been very generous to give their time, their samples, their consent to data. So we're going to be in the open. Our institute is going to use all these tools to try and be as open as possible and learn the lessons from the Human Genome Project. So this is our GitHub. So I'll finish with this one. The new Einsteins will be scientists who share, and that's you. So thank you very much.
Andrew, you made the point that obviously the uniformity in transactions is critical. And I have to say, even with a completely automated, focused prescription tool like the EHR in the US, you still end up with very similar levels of prescriber variation. So ultimately, I think the end game has to eliminate provider variation.
Yeah.
And that essentially means eliminating providers. And so I suppose the question is, is that really being addressed in any meaningful way at a central regulatory mechanism in the NHS?
So the answer to that in a nutshell is no. However, I showed a quick slide. I think the NHS has very lately come to the conclusion that there's been too permissive of variation. So we have, now whether it will work or not, we're not sure, but we should support them. We now have a central NHS body called NHSX. We thought that was a good terminology, which actually is determined to take an iron grip of standardization and work with a very rigorous way with vendors. Because the challenge is getting the vendors to buy into this as well. And we need to be far more authoritative with vendors about what we want. And currently, we're in the foothills of where we need to be.
You had commented that there's undergoing development of a cardiovascular phenotype for the UK. There have been some efforts to do that among other groups. Can you describe a little bit about how that's being done and how it would be validated?
Yes, that's a good question. So under the leadership of Nilesh Samani, who's the medical director of British Heart Foundation, I think they looked across what we call the cardiovascular real estate in the UK, and there's outstanding capability, leadership and capacity in the UK with our BHF centres, our BHF chairs. But there had never been a concerted effort to look at our assets to try and make them accessible within a single data as infrastructure play. So it is an enabling initiative to try to look at and prioritize our cardiovascular data sets, whether they're nested within clinical trials or consented cohorts, or whether in the national registers such as NICOR, to make them discoverable, accessible, and linkable within the infrastructure diagram that I presented. So, and I think they realize that it's a first step to achieve that. Key will be leadership, and if it all goes to plan, we will be advertising for a director who will have the national authority to bring it together.
This issue of data being the new oil, this sort of this attraction for major investors to want to buy up as much data as possible. How does one square that with the sort of public interest and as you mentioned many times in the course of your presentation, that actually the data really belongs to the people who give it in the first place?
Yes. So what we've seen in the UK, understandably, is large companies coming in, trying to, what I say, purchase data right throughout the stack to gain preferential and exclusive access. And to me, that would not be in the public interest. So actually, there's quite a lively debate, as it was in The Guardian yesterday. The trick will be to ensure non-preferential use of data at the bottom of the stack. So a single data item can be used for multiple non-rivalrous, in a non-rivalrous way, but to understanding where the intellectual property kicks in. So it's a very live discussion, but I think there is and still is a risk that the UK could be balkanized if we allow bilateral deals to be struck. What do you think?
I just wonder whether there's some middle ground where institutions such as the NHS can benefit from the willingness to pour enormous amounts of money into the acquisition of data resources.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a benefit share back to the NHS. I think that's a key issue.
Professor Murtagh in Newcastle University empowers the patients to share the data or not. Now, how do you see this type of model to have ethical access to the patient, to data such as la pharmaceutical firm as a big firm taking our own data to make money? It might be a simplification. We need to use NHS data to enable research so medical research can advance. But where do we draw the line, in your opinion, where it goes to basically capitalist organization where they can make money out of us?
Yeah, so it's good, and it actually links to Caroline's point that the key here is benefit share that is fair. And actually, David Porteous has done quite a lot of public engagement around the willingness of the publics for data to be accessed by commercial companies. There is a balance to be struck, however. If it's for pure monetization, there's less enthusiasm. But if there's benefit share back to the NHS with a clear public interest test being met, then there is the legal basis plus the social license to share data. It's a fascinating area of social science, actually. I don't know if it's on the program, is it? One for next time.
Yeah.